Most DIYers have never purchased a nail gun. Even fewer have bought the variety of nail guns that you need for handling different projects. Instead, they turn to two other tools, a drill and a trusty old hammer. These are their fastening tools. They use a drill for driving screws and a hammer for driving nails of all types. But they tend to run into problems when they try to tackle delicate projects. Hammer nailing without bashing things takes practice, and using full-size screws with a drill can be overkill for smaller applications. But there's an alternative that many new DIYers don't even know about, and that's what we're talking about today on the Honest Carpenter Show. If you watch my show, then you know that I place endless value on an 18-volt cordless drill. But when you get into finer finish type work, drills have their limitations because of the types of fasteners that they use. Wood screws, drywall screws, and deck screws all have large, cone-shaped or bugle-shaped heads. This head is mostly what gives them strength, and the shape lets them countersink below the surface more easily. But you're still left with this big, visible circle in your project. You can spend all day filling screw heads, which is a pain, and they'll still show up on stain grade projects. Trim nails are an alternative. Their small, tapered head leaves little damage, and they're easier to hide with wood filler. But again, most people don't have a trim nailer or a brad nailer, and trying to hand nail smaller woodworking projects is a total headache. What they're missing is a fastener type that gets largely overlooked: trim head screws. Trim screws, as we call them, have the body of a screw, but the skinnier head profile of a trim nail. This means that they don't leave that huge quarter-inch circle on the surface when you drive them. Instead, they leave about an 1/8-inch depression. It's so small that you can basically thumb smudge it with wood filler or spackle in one swipe. And this smaller head profile also makes them easier to drive. I see DIYers really trying to force wood screws down, usually because they haven't pre-drilled or countersunk. But even if they do these things, full head screws often split wood because they need to displace so much material at the top. Trim screw heads are barely wider than the shaft, so on softer woods, they'll just slide right below the surface and snug their way in. And they don't cause splitting nearly as much because they're not as big. If I'm doing small mitered corners for a project, I'll often just use a brad nailer. This tool is a godsend. But if I don't have one around and I really need to make joints, the next thing I'm reaching for is a trim screw. The hole it leaves is just barely bigger than a brad. Also, it offers a lot of control because you can watch the joint for movement as you drive. If things start to get out of line, you just release the trigger and reposition. And in these instances, I will pre-drill just to make things go more smoothly. Having that pilot hole ensures that the screw will find its way straight home without binding. Also, because of their narrow head, trim screws always have a square slot or star slot. They can't employ a Phillips or flathead slot. There just isn't enough room on the head. And for really fine trim screws, that slot will typically be a number 1 gauge as opposed to the usual number 2. So you might have to size down in your bits until you find the one that fits. I've always been surprised how strong the bit stability is for these screws. They don't slip that often, and since you don't get much resistance, the screw doesn't fight you that much anyways. The one consideration I'll throw out is that because the head is so small, you sacrifice some strength. With leverage, a piece can be pried off a trim screw, especially if you overdrive the screw. So they're not meant for structural applications. But all the same, they're still stronger than trim nails because they have threads. I've known contractors to prefer them in applications where they want secure trim fastenings, especially on bowed walls where trim doesn't always want to stay put. So they're great for small woodworking projects, mitered corners. They're also great for face frames and other types of cabinetry work where appearance matters. And these days, they even make deck trim screws, so you can use those for your outdoor applications. They're just a great innovation all around. A screw replacement for a trim nail. They're just another weapon in your DIY arsenal. What do you think? Is this helpful? Is it the first time that you're hearing about trim screws? Or do you already use trim screws for other applications that I didn't even mention? Let me hear about it down in the comments. Also, I'm going to link some screws, bits, and tools below. Feel free to browse them, and just remember that when you shop through these links, we receive a tiny commission on anything you purchase, tools or otherwise, at no extra cost to you. It helps us keep making videos, and we greatly appreciate your support. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check back in for more videos coming up soon. And please consider subscribing and hitting that little bell button to turn on notifications. That way you'll know the moment we post something. I'm Ethan James with TheHonestCarpenter.com. I'll see you next time.